My name is Rachel Monroe, and 5 minutes before the most important presentation of my life, I stood in front of 14 investors with my dress torn from hip to hem, and the person who caused it, none other than my female boss, who had accidentally caught her ring on my dress as if it were an accident. But her triumphant gaze told a different story. Little did she know the mysterious woman in the bathroom was actually the person who held the power of life and death at this company. I had spent the last 6 months preparing for this moment. As the Deputy Director of Strategic Development at Wendell Stratton Group, a venture capital firm in Chicago, I knew this presentation could make or break not just my career, but potentially the entire firm's future direction. The conference room at the Peninsula Hotel was filled with the kind of people whose combined net worth exceeded the GDP of small countries. I had rehearsed my pitch dozens of times, memorized every figure, anticipated every possible question. My boss, Marissa Vaughn, had been oddly supportive the past few days, a stark contrast to her usual dismissive attitude toward me. Now I understood why. As we mingled with the investors before the formal presentation, I felt a sharp tug at my side. Marissa had accidentally caught her massive diamond ring on the seam of my navy blue sheath dress as she brushed past me, tearing the fabric from my hip down in a loud, unmistakable rip. The room fell silent. 14 pairs of eyes turned toward me. I felt the cool air of the hotel's aggressive air conditioning against my exposed thigh. The tear was catastrophic. There would be no quick fix. No way to salvage this situation with a safety pin or a stapler. "Oh my goodness, Rachel!" Marissa gasped, her hand flying to her mouth in mock horror. "I'm so sorry. My ring must have caught on your dress." But her eyes told the truth. There was a flash of satisfaction there, a momentary curl of her lips that she quickly suppressed. This was no accident. This was sabotage. "Don't worry," she quickly added, turning to address the room of suddenly uncomfortable investors. "I'm completely familiar with Rachel's presentation. I can step in while she addresses her wardrobe situation." My face burned with humiliation. 6 months of work, countless late nights, and now I was being ushered out of my own presentation because of a wardrobe malfunction that my boss had deliberately caused. I clutched the torn fabric together as best I could and backed out of the room, hearing Marissa's confident voice begin my presentation as the door closed behind me. I stumbled toward the restroom, fighting back tears of anger and frustration. I pushed open the heavy door to find an older woman at the sink, elegantly dressed in a tailored charcoal suit, her silver hair swept into a perfect chignon. She turned as I entered, her keen gray eyes immediately taking in my situation. "Are you all right, dear?" she asked, her voice rich and authoritative. "My dress," I managed, gesturing helplessly at the tear. "It ripped just before my presentation. I'm supposed to be pitching to investors right now, but instead, my boss is doing it." The woman's eyebrows rose slightly. "The blonde woman, the one who tore your dress." I looked at her in surprise. "You saw?" "I was walking past. It didn't look particularly accidental to me." She studied me for a moment, then reached for her phone. "What size do you wear?" "What, a 6, usually, but..." She held up a finger as she made a call. "Meredith, it's Eleanor Grant. I need a favor. There's a young woman in the ladies' room off the Peninsula's Grand Ballroom who needs a dress immediately. Size 6? Something appropriate for a business presentation. Yes, the Armani would do nicely. Have it brought up right away. Thank you." She ended the call and turned back to me. "It will be here in 5 minutes." I stared at her, momentarily forgetting my predicament. "I'm sorry. Did you say Eleanor Grant?" A small smile played at her lips. "I did." My mind raced. Eleanor Grant was a legend in Chicago business circles, the founder of Wendell Stratton Group, now semi-retired but still holding controlling interest in the company. I had never met her. Few people at the company had. She rarely made public appearances anymore. You founded our company," I stammered. "I did," she repeated, amusement dancing in her eyes. "And you are?" "Rachel Monroe. I'm the Deputy Director of Strategic Development at Wendell Stratton." "Ah," she nodded. "And the woman who tore your dress?" "Marissa Vaughn, my direct supervisor. She's the Chief Strategy Officer." Eleanor's expression hardened slightly. "I see." There was a soft knock at the door. Eleanor opened it to reveal a hotel concierge holding a garment bag. She thanked him, took the bag, and handed it to me. "Here you are, Rachel. There's a changing room to your right." I took the bag, still stunned by this turn of events. "Mrs. Grant, I don't know how to thank you." "You can thank me by going back in there and giving your presentation," she said firmly. "I believe I'd like to hear it." 5 minutes later, wearing an impeccably tailored black Armani dress that fit as if it had been made for me, I walked back into the conference room with Eleanor Grant at my side. Marissa was in the middle of explaining my financial projections, or rather, misexplaining them, skewing the numbers to make the growth potential seem less impressive than it actually was. She faltered mid-sentence when she saw me, her eyes widening as they moved from me to the woman at my side. Recognition dawned on her face, followed quickly by alarm. "Mrs. Grant," she said, her voice suddenly thin, "what an unexpected pleasure." "Indeed," Eleanor replied coolly. "I happened to witness an unfortunate incident earlier, and I've been helping Ms. Monroe recover from it." She turned to address the room. "Gentlemen, ladies, I suggest we start over this time with the correct presenter." Marissa's face paled. "Of course, I was just filling in temporarily until Rachel could return." "And now she has," Eleanor cut her off, taking a seat at the far end of the table. "Please continue, Ms. Monroe." I stepped to the front of the room, taking a deep breath as I looked at the faces around me. 14 of Chicago's most influential investors, plus Marissa, who had reluctantly taken a seat at the side of the room, and now Eleanor Grant herself. No pressure. But as I began to speak, something shifted inside me. Perhaps it was the knowledge that the founder of our company had just gone out of her way to help me. Perhaps it was the simmering anger at Marissa's attempted sabotage. Whatever it was, I found myself speaking with a confidence and passion that surpassed even my most successful rehearsals. I walked them through my vision for expanding Wendell Stratton's investment portfolio into sustainable technology and renewable energy infrastructure sectors with enormous growth potential that our firm had largely overlooked. I outlined the financial projections, the risk assessments, the strategic partnerships we could leverage. I answered their questions with precision and insight, never once glancing at my notes. When I finished, there was a moment of silence. Then one of the investors, a notoriously tough venture capitalist named James Whitaker, actually stood up to applaud. The others joined in, and soon the room was filled with the sound of approval. "Ms. Monroe," Whitaker said, "that was one of the most compelling presentations I've heard in years. Count me in." One by one, the others echoed his sentiment. By the end of the meeting, we had secured tentative commitments for nearly twice the investment capital I had hoped for. I caught Eleanor's eye across the room, and she gave me a small nod of approval. Marissa sat rigid in her chair, her face a mask of barely contained fury. As the investors filed out, chatting excitedly about the possibilities I had outlined, she approached me with a tight smile. "Well done, Rachel," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Though I think you might have oversold some of the projections. We'll discuss that back at the office." Before I could respond, Eleanor stepped between us. "Ms. Vaughn, isn't it? I don't believe we've been formally introduced. I'm Eleanor Grant." "Yes, of course, Mrs. Grant," Marissa said, quickly shifting into charm mode. "It's such an honor to meet you. I've always admired your work in building Wendell Stratton." Eleanor replied, clearly unimpressed. "Ms. Monroe, would you join me for lunch? I'd like to hear more about your ideas for the company." Marissa's smile froze on her face as Eleanor led me away. As we walked toward the elevator, Eleanor leaned in and whispered, "The first rule of business, my dear, never let them see they've wounded you, and never, ever forget who did the wounding." I had no idea then how prophetic those words would become. The following Monday, I arrived at the office to find my belongings had been moved from my spacious corner office to a makeshift workspace in what was essentially a storage closet, a windowless room with flickering fluorescent lighting and the persistent smell of toner cartridges from the nearby copy room. "Temporary office reassignments," explained the admin assistant who had helped with the move. "Marissa said to tell you it's just until the renovations on the East Wing are complete." There were no renovations happening in the East Wing. Over the next 2 weeks, I watched as I was systematically isolated from my team. Projects I had initiated were reassigned, My name was accidentally left off meeting invites. Emails went unanswered. When I did manage to attend department meetings, my contributions were either ignored or attributed to others. Marissa had begun a more insidious campaign as well. I overheard her in the break room, speaking in a concerned voice to our HR director. "I'm worried about Rachel," she said. "Ever since the presentation, she's been different, paranoid, claiming I deliberately damaged her dress, if you can believe it, and now she's convinced I'm sabotaging her work. I think the pressure might be getting to her." It was brilliantly executed. A psychological profile was being constructed. Rachel is unstable. Rachel is paranoid. Rachel is cracking under pressure. By the time I realized what was happening, the narrative had already taken root. Colleagues began to look at me with wary concern. The HR director suggested I might want to take some personal time to rest. My team members, once loyal and enthusiastic, now kept their distance, as if my perceived instability might be contagious. I started documenting everything, saving emails, recording conversations when legal, keeping a detailed journal of each day's events. I knew I was being pushed out, but I was determined not to go quietly. Still, as the weeks passed, I found myself increasingly isolated and demoralized. Then came the final straw. I was called into a meeting with Marissa and the HR director, where I was informed that my position was being restructured due to performance concerns. They offered me a choice: accept a significant demotion or take a severance package. I thought about fighting it. I had my documentation, my evidence of systematic harassment and discrimination, but I also knew how these battles typically went: lengthy, expensive, emotionally draining, and ultimately career-damaging, regardless of the outcome. So I took the severance, cleaned out my makeshift office, and walked out of Wendell Stratton Group with my head held high, even as my heart sank with the injustice of it all. I thought that was the end of my story with Wendell Stratton. I was wrong. 3 months later, as I was half-heartedly scrolling through job listings in a coffee shop, my phone rang with an unknown number. Rachel Monroe. The voice on the other end was instantly recognizable. "Mrs. Grant." "Eleanor, please, are you free for coffee this afternoon? There's something I'd like to discuss with you." 2 hours later, I found myself sitting across from Eleanor Grant at a quiet table in the back of an upscale tea room. She looked thinner than I remembered, her tailored suit hanging a bit loose on her frame, but her eyes were as sharp and perceptive as ever. "I've been watching what happened to you at Wendell Stratton," she said without preamble. "It was disgraceful." I blinked in surprise. "You know about that?" "I may be semi-retired, but I still keep tabs on the company I built. After our meeting, I had my people look into Marissa Vaughn. What I found was enlightening. You're not the first person she's pushed out. You know, just the most recent in a pattern." She sipped her tea, studying me over the rim of her cup. "But you're the first one who truly impressed me." I didn't know what to say to that, so I remained silent, waiting for her to continue. "I'm dying, Rachel," she said matter-of-factly. "Pancreatic cancer, stage 4. The doctors give me 6 months, but I suspect it's less." "I'm so sorry," I stammered, shocked by her bluntness. She waved away my sympathy. "I've had a good life, built something meaningful, but I'm concerned about what happens to it after I'm gone." She leaned forward. "Wendell Stratton has lost its way. It's become exactly the kind of cutthroat, ethically compromised institution I never wanted it to be." "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, though I had a suspicion I knew the answer. "Because I want you to help me fix it," she replied. "I still hold controlling interest in the company, 52% of the shares. I'm prepared to transfer that interest to you." I nearly choked on my tea. "What, Mrs. Grant? Eleanor, you can't be serious. You barely know me." "I know enough," she said firmly. "I know you have integrity, vision, and the backbone to stand up for both. That's more than I can say for the current leadership. But there must be someone else, family members, longtime executives. My son has no interest in the business. He's quite happy teaching anthropology at Northwestern. And as for the current executive team," she shook her head, "they're either complicit in the rot or too weak to stand against it." I sat back, overwhelmed by what she was proposing. "I don't know what to say." "Say yes," she replied simply. "Help me ensure that my life's work doesn't become just another soulless money machine." It took 3 more meetings, countless hours of soul-searching, and a thorough review of the legal implications before I finally agreed. By then, Eleanor's health had deteriorated significantly, but her determination remained undiminished. The transfer of shares was done quietly, with Eleanor's lawyers handling all the details. The plan was for me to remain in the background until everything was finalized and legally ironclad. Only then would we make the announcement. That day came sooner than expected. As Eleanor's condition worsened rapidly, her lawyer called me on a Wednesday morning. "It needs to be today," he said. "Eleanor insists. She wants to be there when it happens." And so, that afternoon, I found myself walking into Wendell Stratton Group for the first time in 4 months. The receptionist didn't recognize me at first, then did a double take. "Ms. Monroe, do you have an appointment?" "I'm here for the executive board meeting," I said with a confidence I didn't entirely feel. She checked her computer, frowning. "I don't see your name on the list." "She's with me," came a voice behind me. I turned to see Eleanor's lawyer, Thomas Braddock, striding through the lobby. "Ms. Monroe is attending as my guest." The board meeting was already in progress when we entered the conference room, the real conference room, not the hotel venue where I had given my presentation months ago. Marissa was at the head of the table, mid-sentence in what appeared to be a quarterly performance review. She faltered when she saw me, her eyes widening in momentary panic before she composed herself. "I'm sorry, this is a closed meeting," she said coldly. "Security will escort you out." "That won't be necessary," came a frail voice from the doorway. Eleanor Grant entered the room, supported by a nurse on one side and her son on the other. She had lost more weight. Her face gaunt and her movements slow, but there was still an undeniable authority in her presence that silenced the room instantly. "Mrs. Grant," the company's CEO, Robert Wendell, grandson of Eleanor's original partner, rose from his seat. "We weren't expecting you." "Clearly," she replied dryly. "Please, continue with your meeting. I'm merely here as an observer, and to make a small announcement." She made her way to an empty chair, lowering herself carefully with her nurse's assistance. "Actually, my lawyer will make the announcement. Thomas." Braddock stepped forward, placing a folder on the conference table. "As of 9 o'clock this morning, controlling interest in Wendell Stratton Group has been transferred from Eleanor Grant to Rachel Monroe." The room erupted in a chaos of voices, shock, outrage, confusion. Marissa's face had gone completely white. "This is ridiculous," she sputtered when she finally found her voice. "It can't be legal. The board would have to approve any transfer of—" "Not according to the company bylaws," Braddock interrupted smoothly. "Mrs. Grant's shares are hers to dispose of as she sees fit. The documentation is all in order." Robert Wendell, who held 20% of the company himself, was leafing through the papers with a stunned expression. "It appears to be legitimate," he said finally. Eleanor's voice cut through the noise, weak but clear. "Ms. Monroe has exactly the qualities this company needs right now, integrity chief among them." "Integrity," Marissa laughed bitterly. "Is that what we're calling vindictiveness now?" I had remained silent throughout this exchange, watching the reactions around the table. Now I stepped forward, placing my own folder on the table. "Speaking of vindictiveness," I said calmly, "I've compiled some interesting documentation regarding your management practices. Marissa, specifically, the systematic harassment and sabotage of at least 7 employees over the past 3 years, all of whom were forced out of the company after raising concerns about ethical violations or questioning your decisions." I opened the folder and began laying out printed emails, performance reviews, and testimonials from former employees. "I think the board will find this particularly interesting evidence that you deliberately misrepresented financial projections to steer investments toward companies where you had undisclosed personal financial interests." The room had gone deathly quiet. Marissa's face cycled through shock, rage, and finally, fear, as she realized the extent of what I had uncovered. "This is all circumstantial," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "You can't prove anything." "Actually," said a voice from the doorway, "she can—" A man I didn't recognize entered the room, nodding respectfully to Eleanor. "Ms. Vaughn, I'm Special Agent Carlos Ramirez with the Securities and Exchange Commission. We've been investigating certain investment patterns at Wendell Stratton for the past 6 months. I'd like to ask you some questions. It turned out Eleanor's investigation into Marissa had uncovered more than just workplace bullying. The SEC had been building a case against her for securities fraud and insider trading, using evidence that Eleanor's private investigators had initially discovered and turned over to the authorities. Marissa was escorted from the building that day, her company access revoked, her office sealed for investigation. It was the last time I would see her in person for 6 months. The transition wasn't smooth. Of course, there was resistance from some board members, skepticism from employees, and the inevitable learning curve as I stepped into a leadership role I had never anticipated holding, but I had unexpected allies as well. Robert Wendell, to my surprise, became one of my strongest supporters once he understood the full extent of Marissa's malfeasance. My grandfather and Eleanor built this company on a foundation of integrity, he told me. Somewhere along the way, we lost sight of that. Maybe you're exactly what we need to find our way back. Eleanor's health continued to decline rapidly. In the weeks following the boardroom confrontation, I visited her daily at her Lakeshore Drive apartment, updating her on the changes I was implementing at Wendell Stratton. She listened attentively, offering occasional guidance, but mostly seeming content to know that her company was in hands she trusted. "You're doing well," she told me during what would be our final conversation. "Better than I expected, and I expected quite a lot." "I still don't understand why you chose me," I admitted. "There must have been dozens of people more qualified." She smiled faintly. "Qualifications are easy to come by. Character isn't." She reached for my hand, her grip surprisingly strong despite her frailty. "Promise me you'll use this power wisely, that you'll remember what it felt like to be powerless." "I promise," I said, and I meant it. Eleanor Grant died peacefully in her sleep 3 days later. She left me not only her controlling interest in Wendell Stratton Group, but also a personal bequest of $3 million and a handwritten letter that I keep framed on my office wall to this day. It reads simply, "Power is a tool. Use it to build, not to break. Use it to lift others up, not to hold them down. And remember that true power comes not from what you can take, but from what you can give." In the months that followed, I initiated a comprehensive overhaul of Wendell Stratton's corporate culture. I restructured the HR department, implemented new harassment and whistleblower policies, and hired an independent ethics officer who reported directly to the board. I launched internal mentorship programs specifically designed to support women and minorities in the firm, ensuring they had paths to advancement that wouldn't be blocked by the kind of toxic leadership Marissa had embodied. Most importantly, I steered the company back toward Eleanor's original vision, investing in businesses that created real value, not just financial returns. We became pioneers in sustainable technology investment, just as I had proposed in that fateful presentation, and our success in that sector quickly silenced any remaining doubters. The employees, initially wary of yet another leadership change, gradually warmed to my open-door policy and transparent decision-making process. I made a point of acknowledging the contributions of team members at all levels, creating a culture where credit was freely given and collaboration was rewarded over competition. 6 months after taking control of Wendell Stratton, I established the Eleanor Grant Foundation, dedicated to supporting victims of workplace harassment and discrimination. The foundation provided legal assistance, career counseling, and financial support to people who had been forced out of jobs due to toxic work environments, people like I had been. It was through the foundation that Marissa Vaughn re-entered my life. I was working late one evening, reviewing grant applications for the foundation, when my assistant buzzed to tell me someone was insisting on seeing me without an appointment. "She says you'll want to talk to her," my assistant said doubtfully. "It's Marissa Vaughn." I hesitated only briefly before telling her to send Marissa in. The woman who walked into my office bore little resemblance to the polished, confident executive who had torn my dress all those months ago. Her hair was dull, her expensive clothes replaced by a nondescript pantsuit that hung loosely on her thinner frame. But the most striking change was in her eyes, the calculating sharpness replaced by a haunted, desperate look. "Rachel," she said, her voice hoarse, "thank you for seeing me." I gestured to the chair across from my desk. "What can I do for you?" "Marissa." She sat down heavily. "I need a job. Any job. I haven't been able to find work since everything happened. No one will touch me with the SEC investigation still pending. I'm running out of options. I studied her for a long moment. Why come to me? Surely I'm the last person you'd expect help from. Because you won, she said simply. You destroyed me, my career, my reputation, my life. It's all gone. I thought maybe that would be enough for you. I didn't destroy you, Marissa, I said quietly. I just showed the world who you really are. You did the rest yourself. She flinched as if I'd slapped her. So that's it. You won't help me. I didn't say that. I leaned forward. The Eleanor Grant Foundation helps people who have been victims of workplace harassment and discrimination. That's not you. You were the perpetrator. Her face hardened. So you just wanted me to come here and beg. Is that it? To humiliate myself like you were humiliated? Well, congratulations. You've had your revenge. She stood to leave, but I stopped her with my next words. There's a position at New Horizons Recovery Center. They help executives who've fallen from grace rebuild their lives and careers. It's not glamorous you'd be starting as an administrative assistant, but it's a foot in the door, and they believe in second chances. She stared at me, suspicion and hope warring in her expression. Why would you help me at all? I thought about Eleanor's letter, framed on the wall behind me. Because power isn't about breaking people, even people who tried to break you. Marissa didn't take the job at New Horizons. Her pride wouldn't allow her to accept help from me. I suppose. I heard later that she left Chicago, moving to Arizona to work for her brother's small accounting firm. Sometimes I wonder if she ever understood what had really happened, that it wasn't about revenge, but about justice. Not just for me, but for all the others she had hurt along the way. A year after taking control of Wendell Stratton Group, I stood before the entire company at our annual meeting. The firm had just posted its most successful quarter in a decade. Our sustainable technology fund was outperforming market expectations by double digits, and employee satisfaction scores were at an all-time high. A year ago, I told them, I came into this role through unusual circumstances. Many of you were skeptical, and rightfully so. Why should you trust someone who had been pushed out of the company just months earlier? What did I know about leading a firm of this size and complexity? I paused, looking out at the sea of faces that now looked back at me with respect rather than suspicion. What I knew was this leadership isn't about power over others, it's about empowering others. It's about creating an environment where every person can do their best work without fear of sabotage or harassment, where credit is given freely and responsibility is shared willingly, where we succeed together rather than at each other's expense. I touched the small brooch I wore on my lapel, a simple silver pine cone that had belonged to Eleanor. She had told me once that she chose the pine cone as her personal symbol because pine trees release their seeds not in times of plenty, but in response to the heat of forest fires. Renewal after destruction, she had called it. Wendell Stratton was founded on principles of integrity, innovation, and impact. I continued. For a time, we lost sight of those principles, but like the phoenix, or perhaps more aptly, like the pine tree after a fire, we have emerged stronger, our roots deeper, our vision clearer. I raised my glass in a toast. To Eleanor Grant, who knew that true power lies not in what we can take from others, but in what we can give, and to all of you, who have given your talent, your trust, and your tireless effort to rebuild this company into something we can all be proud of. As I looked out at my colleagues, my team, I thought about the journey that had brought me here, a torn dress, a chance encounter, a woman who saw something in me that I hadn't fully seen in myself. I had promised Eleanor I would remember what it felt like to be powerless, and I have kept that promise. Every decision I make is guided by the memory of standing in that conference room, feeling the cool air on my exposed skin, seeing the triumph in Marissa's eyes as she thought she had won. But what Marissa never understood, what Eleanor had known instinctively, was that true power doesn't come from pushing others down. It comes from lifting them up, from creating something meaningful that outlasts you, from planting seeds that will continue to grow long after you're gone. Eleanor's legacy lives on not just in the company that bears her partner's name, but in the lives changed by her final act of faith, her belief in me, and my legacy, I hope, will be that I proved her right. I am Rachel Monroe, and this is my story of how a moment of public humiliation became the catalyst for transformation, not just for me, but for an entire company. It's a story about power, how it can be abused, how it can be used for good, and most importantly, how it can be reclaimed. Sometimes I think about that torn dress, now preserved in a shadow box in my home office, not as a reminder of humiliation, but as a testament to resilience, to the truth that sometimes the things meant to break us become the very things that make us unbreakable.